implementation of decarbonisation plans can be worked with the existing infrastructure of the site and the lifetime of the existing assets. So what we're going to cover today is a very short introduction to MEP. I'm aware, as Christos has said, that some of you would have been to one or perhaps both of the previous sessions. And we'll then talk about what a decarbonisation, or difficult to justify measures, how they can all be collectively moved forward. The presenters today are myself, Alistair Wilcock. I am the Programme Manager for the Modern Energy Partners Programme, and also Richard Leach, who has been providing us with some very able technical leadership through the programme. As Christos mentioned, this is one of 5 bite-sized sessions. You may well have attended session 1, session 2, and equally you may already have signed up for session 4 or 5. I hope you're finding them interesting and useful, and we are very interested to hear your feedback on those. What would be really useful for me actually would be if you could just use the MS Teams functionality to raise your hand if you've already been to one of those, because then I can just gauge as to how much of the introduction I need to go through. Okay, so around about half. That's good. Okay, right. Well, thanks. If you can put your hands down again, that would be great. I will cover the introduction, but I'll be a little briefer, just so that we can save a bit of time. So, in terms of the session aim today, we are looking to share the insights of the MEP programme and the learning from it, help share what we have found and consider to be at least best practice from the MEP point of view, and really start some discussions and help you to think about what it is that you will have to do in the process of the decarbonisation of the public sector estate, which, let's be honest, is a very large challenge in itself. We are really happy to answer your questions. We very much want to aid you in this journey. We can take those questions today, but our contact details are on the slides, so please feel free to reach out, and we will happily address those questions at a later stage as well. As far as today is concerned, we have got a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to make use of that. But if you do have any questions as we go, very happy to try and pick those up as we proceed. So please put those into the chat, and we will look to answer those as we go through the presentation. So a quick introduction to Modern Energy Partners. It's an innovation program that has been funded by SICE, part of BEIS. It's in partnership with the Cabinet Office and the Energy Systems Catapult. Both myself and Richard work for the Energy Systems Catapult, and the ESC has been doing the legwork, shall we say, the delivery of the program on behalf of BEIS and Cabinet Office. It has been a very collaborative program and continues to be so. And you can see on the right hand side of the slide all of the the various different government departments, and also the other areas that have been involved in the program in one way or another. The program's been basically in 2 phases. There was an early phase which was looking to set the scene, set up the program, and work out what the plans were, and that ran until March 2019. And then following that for a further 2 years until this March just gone, has been a much more delivery-intensive phase, during which time the real push of delivery has taken place. It has covered, the MEP programme has covered a large range of sites, of 42 sites. Today we're going to be talking about decarbonisation plans as part of our discussion. We've so far achieved 24 decarbonisation plans, as you can see from the bottom right hand side of the slide. These are detailing a pathway to deliver carbon reduction targets by 2032. Just to note that 2032 is in there because the targets were set for the MEP programme from the 5th carbon budget, and the 50% reduction of carbon was the target in 2032. By 2032 was the target in the 5th carbon budget, and of course the 6th carbon budget has since come in from the Climate Change Commission at the end of last year. You can see from the left-hand side of the slide that there's been a good spread of sites across the 3 main departments: the MOD, the MOJ, and the National Health Service. And they have, and the sites themselves have covered a reasonable proportion of the total carbon emissions, or scope 1, scope 2 emissions, that enables some reasonable extrapolations to be done to understand what that might mean across the wider estate. We've also been involved in a couple of other sites, an HMRC site, and also at Cardiff University. So just a quick update on what MEP has actually achieved across 3 of the Pathfinder sites. These were the early sites that were kicked off during that first phase of the programme. You can see here, I won't read it all out, but you can see the amount of savings that have been delivered, both in terms of finances and also in terms of tonnes of carbon equivalent. So some good benefits there, and we're very, very proud of what has been achieved so far. So that concludes the introduction. I'll hand over to Richard to carry on.
Thanks, Alistair. I suppose just to set the context a bit further from what Alistair has set out. So going back to the previous slide, one of the key challenges for the programme has been working with many departments and different sites and trying to work out how to develop a consistent approach to decarbonise the site, to begin with, what is net zero for sites, what's included, what's in scope, how can you evaluate different combinations of projects in different departments on an equal basis in a way that it would be consistent with government funding. So, a core part of the problem has been working with those different partners of how you set a consistent whole energy system based approach to try and tackle the problem, because from my experience, and probably lots of people on the call, every approach is trying to save energy or decarbonize site in a different way. Consultancies or organizations that might work with generally have specialisms and familiarities with particular technologies or ways of going about things. So what we've tried to do within the program is to have a consistent approach all across the government estate. So that set the scene for the problem. So the current slide at the moment is just trying to share some best practice from the MEP program and some insights that we've learned of how you can go about thinking about how to decarbonise the site and achieve net zero, but within the overall management of the site and its asset management plans. So I think that the key message that we're having worked with many sites, I've worked with 24 different sites in the NHS, MOD and MOJ. One of the key messages and takeaways is to really have an understanding and a concept of how you think that site is going to achieve net zero. And through having that, you can then consider how best to combine things like asset replacement, estate management plans, site development plans, because what we found in the program is those things are often, not always, but often have been separate to energy work and net zero work, and they haven't been combined. So things are going off in different directions. So having that approach is really important. So from a economic whole life cycle cost perspective and delivering best value, we need to sort of plan measures on a pathway that's getting to net zero, so we're not doing works that aren't the right, that might need to be changed or weren't the right thing to do further down the line. So the slide has got an illustration of some of the work that we've done in the MEP program. So what we've tried to do is set out in that consistent way, understanding the key characteristics of the site and how you baseline the energy use and emissions associated with the site. So we define what we called an as-is situation. The sort of middle section of the slide, we've got the, I suppose, the plan for the site. So and when that plan's developed for the transition, you can work out how you align any sort of works, maintenance or any other works at site with that net zero plan. And then the final diagram is a sort of vision of how that site and what the could get to net zero and the main sort of energy system or building changes that will be needed to get there. So moving on, please, Alistair. So what we found in the program, we've got a comment there. Alistair, present.
Hello?
There's a comment, there's something in the chat from Matt.
Oh, sorry, I missed.
Sorry, is there any chance you could present so I could just see the slide a bit clearer?
Oh, right, okay.
Sorry to distract you.
That's okay. Is that just on full screen?
I think there's normally a little icon somewhere. I'm trying to look because I'm in the world of Google at the minute, so...
Is that any better?
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Alistair.
Right.
So yeah, this slide. We've worked with many sites. This slide is trying to highlight some of the sort of the common recurring themes that we've seen across the majority of sites. And you know, yeah, what do we see in all sites to get to that net zero kind of journey? So one of the main takeaways really and associated with the target is how we cost effectively decarbonize fossil fuel use on site. So a lot of the program is based on what we refer to as non-traded emissions. Grid electricity is decarbonising. So electricity decarbonisation, it's still important and still needs to be part of the solution. But from a decarbonisation net zero perspective, we can, I suppose, assume that the grid will decarbonise to achieve that. And there's a lot of government policy, as lots of people are probably aware of, that focused on electricity generation. The real challenge from the government's perspective was how we decarbonise fossil fuel use on site. So that's generally been associated with heat. Generally, a lot of that, you know, there hasn't been, you know, there are examples of sites that have done things with heat and I suppose traditionally you have CHP, which did provide carbon savings to a point, but needs to go a lot further because it's based on gas. There were sites that used sort of biomass systems that we've worked with. A lot of sites hadn't done anything or thought really about how they were going to decarbonise heat, and that's been one of the main things that we focused on. So yeah, heat is the challenge, and it's something that we need to focus on. So in a lot of the sites that we worked with, I suppose we had to hit a target by 2032, which meant that we couldn't rely on the possibility of something like hydrogen becoming available because there wasn't any certainty. So we've had to decarbonise sites' heating systems, and that's generally involved not entirely moving away from gas, but moving away from gas to possibly a hybrid system that combines heat pumps, or you know, yeah, we need to reduce the amount of gas use on site. So that's been a key focus, and reducing that gas use on a pathway of how you will actually totally decarbonise that site heating system. So how you might go about phasing that. So in a lot of the sites that we worked with, particularly where we've worked with hospitals, that's involved moving possibly away from steam or medium temperature hot water to low temperature hot water and how that might be phased. And usually a lot of the sites had a centralized component for the heat system. So sometimes if there were lots of decentralized gas boiler systems, staging of how you could go to a centralized solution to give some sort of flexibility than if for the generation technology. So it could be a heat pump today. For the next 15 years, it might be an electric boiler in the future, or a hydrogen boiler, or hydrogen CHP. So that was sort of a lot of the recurring things that we've seen. I suppose another key thing that we were able to do in the program, a lot of the sites have sort of estate management plans at the scale that we've worked with, or and plans for refurbishment or redevelopment. So decarbonising heat is expensive. It can involve infrastructure change, heating system, distribution system change. It might need building fabric works to help with the type of system that's being designed. So what we've been able to do by taking that kind of like whole site approach is to look at sort of site development plans and see where we can costs could be attributed to site refurbishment or development rather than being a specific energy thing. We've also, in all sites, no regret measures were also prioritised. So we'll talk about no regret measures in a bit more detail on what they are, but they're generally the sort of energy saving things that give you a return on investment that people are happy with. So things like LED lighting. And the way that we've approached it in the program is trying to combine those measures alongside to take it as a whole site solution from a economic evaluation perspective. Because the cost of heat decarbonisation doesn't provide a return on investment. So how can you best combine lots of different measures to give the best economic case? In all of the sites, we've developed an electrical strategy. The electrical strategy needs to be aligned to the heat strategy, particularly if decarbonisation of heat involves any electrification. All of the sites had a large projected increase in EV charging requirements. We're working a lot of public sector sites like hospitals, MOD sites, etc. That have lots of vehicles being used on site, and sort of passenger cars that will electrify. So we're looking at future electrical demands. So an electrical strategy is needed to consider how you might reduce electricity use on site, but also accounting for forward projected electricity use. So sort of thinking about where renewable generation could be used to kind of help mitigate the cost of further electrification. And then again, going back to that point of how you can connect. So if you can have renewable generation on site, that can help, when you bring it together as a package, help offset the cost of the heat decarbonisation aspect. So we've tried to take that whole site approach. Next one, please, Alistair. Next slide. So, they were some of the those two slides were some of the sort of examples from MEP and the Insight. So, taking that forward on sort of best practice and thinking about how to combine works that you might be thinking about on site. So, some of the key themes, really, we've got 5 themes on this slide, and they're things that you can consider alongside any asset replacement plans, site management plans, site maintenance plans. So I suppose the first point again is to think about this whole system approach. So how we can't really, to get to net zero, thinking things in isolation won't work. All of those things need to add up together to get to net zero. So some of the main aspects that we thought been thinking about are no regret measures. So one of the key things for no regrets is to think about how they align with the heat and electricity strategy for the sites, so they're part of an overall decarbonisation plan. And as I've said, a core focus has to be around the site's heat strategy and how we move our fossil fuel use on site. So thinking about if we've got gas boiler systems or gas systems on site, the end of life, when they need to be replaced, and then does that fit into the overall pathway for the site. It's important to think about EV uptake and requirements depending on your site and the amount of cars coming to site and EV charging requirements going forward. And that point again, so if we're potentially electrifying heat and we're and there's further EV electricity demand at sites in the future, if people are thinking about renewable generation systems, it's thinking about the phasing and the size of those that aligns with a changing electricity demand in the future. And I suppose one of the, most difficult challenges on site has been around site's heating distribution systems. So making changes to those to facilitate low carbon heat solutions is expensive and difficult. So having that heat strategy, so sites can plan any sort of building maintenance works and try and coordinate that with any heat system distribution change to sort of to minimize cost and make and try and combine works and avoid site disruption has been very helpful. And now on the slide, those items are broken down into separate themes, but they all connect. And I suppose that's one of the key messages, is to try and think about how these things connect and not doing them in sort of isolation. Next slide, please, Alistair. So just to sort of summarize really on some of the things we've talked about, I suppose what we've learned and working with all of the different sites is that net zero changes everything. So I've been involved in sort of energy management and energy work for a long time, and that's fine. So we do need to carry on doing energy projects or asset replacement where a project or a new piece of kit will be better for a site or save money. But just doing that won't get to net zero unless all of those components are part of a plan and are trying to get to an end goal of net zero and how they work together. So just to kind of re-emphasize some of the points and moving forward, I suppose one of the key takeaway messages is to have an understanding of your existing assets, which many of you probably will, when they need to be replaced and what the plans for those replacement will be. Is there a like-for-like replacement on site, or what's the policy around plant replacement and things like that. So looking at boilers, etc., and those types and key pieces of energy system kit, having an understanding when their end of life would be, so you can put that onto the sort of a timeline for the site. Thinking about things like who operates, and if there are any contracts where there are third parties providing energy service, ESCO type arrangements, when do those contracts end, and when you can do things and how you can align that to a decarbonisation plan for the site. So that's all of that. I suppose the key message is having that decarbonisation. It may not need to be a detailed plan, but having a vision of how you think that site will get there, or what changes will need to be made at sites. And I suppose just to kind of summarize on some of that thinking, that we've seen lots of different practices throughout the program, some good and some of them not so good. So the chart that we've got on the screen just shows an example of a site that has taken that thinking, and the chart shows their emissions from today to 2032, and that site's able, the forecast to get to an 86% emission reduction from today for total emissions. They're in quite a unique position, because we found that quite a lot of sites still using coal for heat. So that site is the main plan is around replacing that coal-fired heat generation with a heat pump-based system. But part of the journey is looking at the sort of low regret measures and the other changes to the site needed to help facilitate a heat pump-based system and moving to a lower temperature heating distribution system, and also combining that site had some land availability, so trying to combine the renewable generation at sites to help mitigate the cost of the sort of the heat electrification aspect. So that's it, Alistair, for me for now. Do you want to? Okay.
Thank you, Richard. Yes. So Richard made mention of the low regrets measures, and I thought it was just worth exploring those just a little bit further, just so that we're clear as to what we mean by that. Low regrets generally means low capital cost, and an intervention that's also going to save operational cost as well as the carbon. So they're relatively easy to convince the powers that be that it's the right thing to do, because obviously there's a financial saving there as well. And they are usually things like LED lighting change, also change to LED lighting, should I say, improving building management system controls, that sort of thing, or perhaps even behavioural changes, which of course may not be zero cost, but at least a low cost to do. Other examples would include things like enabling technologies or changes that enable something else to happen further down the line. Sorry about that. So, for example, reducing heat flow temperatures is an example, because that is something that can then facilitate the later adoption of heat pumps, for example, or other low carbon heating systems. Building refurbishment and maintenance works might fall into this category, and it's also worth remembering, of course, that having a good understanding of heat and cooling demands really helps to formulate and develop a robust strategy to get to net zero. And the building management systems or other sub-metering systems can be really helpful in that. So being able to make that investment in a building management system or some other thing like that can really make a difference. Richard?
Just to add to that, so the experience from working with all the sites that we've worked with, that sort of electricity sub-metering and understanding that was quite widespread across a lot of the sites, but the understanding of heat and then generally there was just one gas main meter and data, and part of the project we've looked at how do we design a new heat system for a site, which is obviously quite difficult if we haven't got a good breakdown of, in a hospital, for example, the different types of heat requirements and main areas of use, breakdown between just even just hot water use versus heat use, etc. So so part of it's another workshop, I think, but trying to get that kind of good understanding of heat and cooling at a site is going to be very important on the sort of net zero journey.
Thanks, Richard. So turning to the MEP experiences, we found a number of building management systems in very poor condition. They were either underinvested or ignored, or people were just using them to actually use sort of for manual control. So we found that we suggested and have actually enabled getting some of these building management systems back into a good condition, which is a relatively low cost, really gives that benefits of some good data to help that direct intervention effort and in order to reduce energy consumption. Steve Perry, you have your hand up. Really? Yes, not sure if you're going to say something.
Oh, sorry, hit the wrong button there. Right, okay. You mentioned about the importance of heat metering, but you haven't mentioned about legislation and about the importance of heat networks and medium combustion regulation, which I think is a major driver towards getting the end customer to do the right thing. Do you think it's worthwhile mentioning that at this point?
Richard, do you want to take that?
It's something I'm not as up to speed with Steve on that legislation. I suppose, a lot of the sites that we worked with had, well, some of them had like a network, a heat network, a centralized system on site. But even there, there wasn't really hardly any heat metering working. and the same with BMS systems where you would, I think things have just kind of, so I've worked in energy management quite for a while, and that used to be quite widespread where BMS systems were being used, but there just seems to be, I don't know if it was just the sites we were working with where that metering, there was heat metering sometimes installed but hadn't just been used, and the same with BMS. So if you could give a quick update, Steve, on that legislation, is that for new systems, or is it?
It's just kind of coming out really. The need for the medium combustion regs has been out there a while, but the heat network regs is very specific in the customer having the means of metering heat. And obviously if you don't have the heat and you're not monitoring it, you're not doing something with the data, then you're not non-compliant. In fact, we've got the environmental agency after us at the moment looking into why we've not complied. So, but where there's a means, there's the end, and clearly if there's a driving legislative pulse to this, well, let's get a double whammy off it. Let's do it because it's the right thing to do for net zero carbon, but let's do it because it's a legislative compliance issue too.
Yeah, and that would definitely help.
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that, Steve. That was interesting. Yep. Yes, next point is thinking about the reduction of electricity consumption, for example, by LED lighting replacement. And if you look on the right-hand side there, you can see the reduction of the of electricity consumption in the first few years, which is due to, for example, LED lighting replacement and other electricity efficiency measures. And then you can see the expectation of the site load increasing, which is due to the installation of some electrical heating equipment, heat pumps or similar, and then that is being offset by the installation of some PV system in order to reduce the total load that is being required. So the point being that being able to reduce the electricity demand creates some headroom between the actual demand and the maximum demand of the site, which helps in the future. Hence, it falls into this low regrets category.
Just adding on to that, I don't know if I've missed the point where you're covering it, Alistair, but just to check. So a lot of the sites that we worked with in the program, there was a lot of heat electrification, and in a lot of those sites had constrained electricity grid connections, so upgrading supply at the or just constrained of how we could best go about that. And it's trying to think of those things together. So going back to the point, so not that example slide that we've got there, which is a prison, but some of the other sites that really had a big increase in electrical demand forecasted from EV vehicles and heat electrification, we really did need to try and help have a strategy in place for electricity where the grid was constrained and it would be very expensive to reinforce.
Okay, and then we've also talked a bit about the replacement of other assets and thinking about the lifetime of those assets and the what might be considered to be the planned replacement time or the timing of that replacement. This is particularly useful in terms of assets that are currently not cost effective to target because they don't, as it were, pay their way. They have a longer payback. They will, obviously, because that's the point of the game, deliver a carbon saving, but they won't deliver a significant or even any operational financial saving. So we found very often on the MEP program that the management of and the maintenance of equipment was very often on a fail and fix basis. It was reactive, something failed, it was fixed, rather than it being done on a more proactive basis. And so that also has an influence on the lifetime of the asset, potentially shortening it. So thinking about how justifying those costs for asset for net zero, and looking at the splitting of those costs between the different, as it were, buckets. So if you're coming up to the replacement of the asset, then we can, some of the cost may be possibly put to a like-for-like refurbishment cost or replacement cost, and then there is only an additional cost that needs to be attributed to the net zero in order to cover the additional cost. So for some examples on MEP, the planned refurbishment costs for a building, for example, it might be that a particular building is planned to be refurbished in a particular year, and all of the arrangements, emptying the building, etc., are needing to be done anyway in order to do that, and lots of work will be done in order to reconfigure the building. But that's an ideal opportunity to do window replacement, insulation, perhaps to change the heat emitters, the radiators in the building, in order to be able to use a lower temperature circulation system, for example, because those can all be done at the same time while the building is being dealt with. And that, as an example, that extra and over cost of enabling net zero can be attributed to the net zero, while all the rest of the costs are done for refurbishment, as opposed to just hitting the thing as a complete net zero project. And adapting, as I've just mentioned, adapting the heat distribution infrastructure to lower temperature heating systems is also potentially there. So in summary, what we talked about today is what's in a decarbonisation plan. We've mentioned the sort of evaluation of the current position, the concept pathway, the transition plan, that future state, and we've talked about the really understanding the site, understanding the assets, understanding the lifetime of those assets, and by doing that, then planning effectively on the basis of what really is the case for that site, and the future plans for it. The number of people going to be on the site going to be increased, decreased, buildings demolished, etc., etc., etc. Knowing all of that information enables the interventions into refurbishment of site assets, etc., in order to be able to justify and minimise the overall cost of the net zero journey that we are all on.